I love this. It's amazing.
This is Gapminder. It was made by Hans Rosling. You have variables on the side. You can choose what one. They go into further detail. You can change the speed of it. It can go up. The lower it goes, the slower it goes. The higher it goes, the faster it goes. And if you hit play, it'll move and show trends. You can hit stop. You can put it to a certain time.
The sides of the bubbles show the size and population of the specific countries, and the color shows what continent it's in. If you want to focus on like certain continents and areas, you can click on the continent and it will make those countries flash. If you want to focus in on a specific country, then you can scroll through and pick the country. And say you want to focus on Belgium, you can click Belgium, and if you click play, it will follow Belgium and make the rest lighter colored than Belgium is. And you can change the color transparency of all the other countries by scrolling this. The darker it gets on this side, the darker the countries are.
One love, one heart. Literacy and life expectancy. Literacy, knowledge,
Feel alright.
Hear the children crying.
One love.
Hear the children crying.
One heart. Saying give thanks and praise to the Lord. And
Knowledge you have for a better job. The better job you have, the more money you make. The more money you make, you can buy food and afford good health care. The more food and better health care, the longer you will live. You can see the more literacy people read, their life expectancy will get longer.
The African countries are developing, and they do not have the wealth to afford the books, which causes their life expectancy to be shortened. Italy has the greatest life expectancy. Their age is to 80 to 85 years. Rwanda had a huge drop from 49 years to 28 years of life expectancy. This is because genocide in Rwanda causing the life expectancy to drop.
India starts at 55 and it kept climbing. By 2011, it's in their 70s.
We predict that in the future, the life expectancy will be 100 years because more people are becoming wealthier, so they can pay for more books, so they can better their knowledge, so they can fulfill a successful life.
In the beginning of 1800, all the continents were just in one giant blob. None were majorly different from one another. All the countries and continents had about 6 children per woman, and about 400 out of 1,000 babies would die before the age of 5. At around 1900, which you'll see in a minute, Europe, which will be the orange, will start branching off down here. In Europe, there began to be less child mortalities, as you can see right now, and less children per woman. Along with Europe, United States and Canada, the 2 yellows, started to follow. By around 1940s, this was the first time you can significantly see the difference between Europe and the rest of the continents. As time progresses, Europe slows down, and as all the other countries catch up, except for Africa. Africa, as you can see in blue, still has many infant mortalities and lots of children per woman. However, they are still much lower than before. In fact, as time went on, everywhere in the world had less children dying before the age of 5 and fewer children per woman. Based on the trends I see, I predict that in the future, life expectancy in countries around the world will grow, and that all countries and continents like Africa will end up evening out and having around 2 children per woman. My prediction about the future for infant mortality is that fewer infants will die before the age of 5. I think this because there is more technology to keep them alive, and so in 20 years, scientists will have cures for why these babies are dying today. Therefore, there will be less deaths. However, this could go either way. There might be less infant mortalities because of cures, but there also may be more children dying before the age of 5 because as the population rises, there may not be enough food and basic resources to keep these young children in third world countries alive.
The topics we are comparing are child per woman over time and the child mortality over time. Child per woman is the average number of babies born per woman. Child mortality per 1,000 kids is the amount of children that do not live past the age of 5. We can predict that the lower the infant mortality rate is, the less amount of children to be born per woman. This is because if back in the 1800s your child did not survive, you would just have another. Now we can count on most children living past an infant, so there is not as much children being born into each family.
Back in the 1900s, the child mortality rate per 1,000 babies was very high. In Rwanda, 400 babies per 1,000 would not survive past the age of 1. For Canada, it was surprisingly 300. As time went on, the rate decreased rapidly, first for Canada, slowly for Rwanda. Started to decrease as well. By 2012, you can notice that Canada's child mortality rate has decreased down to 6, where Rwanda is still up in the hundreds. During the 1800s, the average woman in Rwanda would have 7 children. At the same time in Canada, women were only having 4.5 children. As this number continues to decrease in Canada during the 1900s, the numbers of children born in Rwanda increases to up to 8.5 children per woman. By this time, Canada has already dropped to 1.5 children per woman. As Canada's average stays at this number, Rwanda begins to rapidly decrease. Since the rate of infant mortality is lower, women have stopped having as much children since they can count on them to survive. We proceed that in the future, the amount of children per woman being born in Africa countries would even out at the amount of being born in Canada, but by an average of 1.5. We can also predict that the high level of infant mortality will continue to drop for African countries as well.
We are comparing literacy rate in children per woman. Literacy rate is the percentage of people who can read and write everyday statement with understanding. Children per woman is the average children a woman has in her lifetime. We assume that the better educated women are, they would tend to begin their families at a later age and have fewer, healthier children. Women with more education generally have a better personal health and a better idea of how to maintain a healthy family with the money they have.
Back in the 19th century, there were very few countries on the grid, most of which were developing countries that came from Africa. Once we get to around 1980, you can't tell that more countries are coming on the grid. no, you can tell more countries coming on the grid. Most developing countries have a high birth rate but low literacy rate because they can't afford good education, and most developed countries have a high literacy rate and low birth rate. By about the year 2000, most countries have started to make their way towards the top left of the grid, or have already made it there. Out of the 70 or so countries that have a good literacy rate and low child per woman rate, only 2 of them are from South Africa. And all the rest of the South African countries are still waiting to get there. Burundi, a South African country, has made a big change in their literacy rate from around the year 2000 till 2008 compared to any other country. If you take a quick peek back at 1997, you can tell that most South African countries had a low literacy rate but high child per woman rate. Now in the year 2011, most South African countries are close to having a high literacy rate and low child per woman rate. Based on the trends we see, we predict that all countries will eventually be at a high literacy rate and be having fewer children per woman, such as Afghanistan. It is making its way over to fewer children per woman and slowly making its way towards a better literacy rate.
Our 2 variables that we are comparing are income on the x-axis and child mortality on the y-axis. Income is the amount of money made by a person from working or through investments. Child mortality is the number of children ages 0 to 5 who die.
We think that the less income a family brings home, the greater the child mortality will be. We think this because the less money the family has, the less they have to afford necessities such as food, healthcare, etc.
We have chosen to compare Canada and China. In the 1800s, Canada's income increases. However, their child mortality remains the same. Meanwhile, in China, their income is decreasing below 1,000, and their child mortality is also staying the same, around 400. Canada's child mortality started to decrease in the 1830s, but China's income continued to decrease. In the 1870s, Canada's income increased and decreased between 2000 and 4000, but their child mortality remained the same, around 300. In the 1850s, China's income continued to decrease and their child mortality also increased to around 600. In 1856, China's income finally began to increase and their child mortality decreased. In the 1850s, child mortality decreased quickly to 200 and income slowly increased to 1,000.
In 1953, Canada's child mortality finally reached 40, with their income greater than 10,000. From 1958 to 1963, China's income and infant mortality were constantly increasing and decreasing. This was caused from Cultural Revolution. In 1970 to 1980s, China's income slowly increased to 2,000, while their infant mortality finally dropped to 40. In the 1990s to 2000, income decreased only slightly, and their infant mortality continued to decrease to 6. In 2000, China finally reached 4,000 in income per person, and their infant mortality decreased to 20. In Canada, from 2000 to 2012, infant mortality decreased to approximately 5. By 2012, China's income was 10,000 per person, and their infant mortality had an amazing decrease to 20. Therefore, the more money the country has, the less deaths we can expect. We think that in the future, countries will continue to have greater income, and they will have to worry less about child mortality.
Life expectancy
The average period that a person may expect to live.
Food supply. Calories measured in food per person per day. In 1961, most of the sub-Saharan Africa was in the lower end of both life expectancy and food supply.
Since 1960 to 2007, most of Europe and Central Asia was at the top of the food supply and life expectancy.
In 1970, Cambodia's food supply dropped because of Cambodia's civil war.
As you can see, in the year 1993, Rwanda's life expectancy drops to under 30 years and then gradually increases in the years 1994 to 2007, and its life expectancy in 2007 was 60 years. I think why they are connected, because the graph shows that the more food supply there is, the longer life expectancy is.
We think that in the future, the continents will keep increasing in both life expectancy and food supply.
Our Gapminder presentation is about the literacy and gender equality.
Literacy means the ability to read and write, and education and language.
Gender equality is when men and women should receive equal treatment and should not be discriminated against based on gender.
We believe that the lower the literacy is, the lower the gender equality will be.
Right from the beginning, 1975, you can tell that the richest countries, such as America, have the fastest literacy and gender equality.
The poorest of countries have unfair equality and literacy, such as Africa.
In 1975, Burkina Faso, the ratio of young literate females to males was 30, and the literacy rate was only 8.7, not even 10.
Within just a year more, countries slowly started to move up towards a literacy rate of 60, but Africa is still near the bottom of the chart. The ratio of young literate females to males
By 1991, many countries have been moving toward the top right corner of the grid, including small parts of Africa such as Zimbabwe, South Africa, Swaziland, and Botswana.
Mainly, most countries are above 30 for the literacy rate and above 50 for the ratio of young literate females to males.
In 2004, some parts of Africa have been pushed down to the lower half of the grid, such as Ethiopia, Sierra Leone, Niger, and Mali.
For now, East Asia and Pacific is above 59 for the literacy rate.
By 2009, almost all the countries are at the top of the grid, except parts of Africa are still near the bottom.
In fact, some parts of Africa moved up in female-to-male ratio, but didn't move up at all in literacy. In some parts of Africa, the people are in poverty. With the very little money they have, they'd rather save it.
This reminds us of the documentary we watched in class. Many people live off of $1 to $9 a day. In Canada, blowing $10 to $30 at a mall is almost close to nothing for us.
But for now, most countries remain at the top of the chart, while Africa settles near the bottom half of the grid.
Just like the Declaration of Human Rights says, the right to education, education is a right. Thank you for listening to our
Gapminder presentation.
Our two variables are literacy and income per person. GDP, income per person, is the amount of money a person makes each year. Literacy is the percent of people that can read in the country. The connection is that the higher the income, the higher the literacy rate.
On our x-axis, we have income per person, and on our y, we have literacy rate. And we are following India because it shows a good example of our relationship between the two
Variables?
variables. As you can see, as India starts to move more to the right, it also starts to move up as well, because as a relationship, as the higher the income, the higher the literacy rate.
Do you have a prediction for the future?
Oh yeah. Our prediction is that in later years, that all the countries will soon be up in this region, as they will all have a higher income and a high literacy rate.
The two variables that we are doing are food supply per person and income per person. Income per person is measured by the GDP, gross domestic product, and tells an average of how much each person is in that country can speed up in 1 year. Food supply is measured by kilocalories and tells an average of how much each person eats per day. We assume that if you have more money, you will be able to have more food and succeed, while the less money you have, the less food a person might have.
Back in 1961, most countries were near the bottom left corner, except for North America and Europe and Central Asia. They were near the middle. Also in 1961, Kuwait has the most making country in the world, and Switzerland has the most food supply in the world. In 1970, we can see that South America is slowly gaining and moving away from Africa and South Asia. In 1985, Europe and North America keep gaining, while Africa is still at the bottom, struggling to move up.
You can also see China rapidly gaining and eventually is going to catch up to where North America is. In 2001, you can see that Congo Democrat went off the Gapminder with income because of the Second Congo War, starting in 1998 and ended in 2003.
We think that in the future, income and food supply per person will increase slowly, while China will increase a lot, catching up with Europe and North America countries, while Africa will stick near the bottom left corner of the Gapminder and decrease.
Our Gapminder presentation compares China and Canada's income per person throughout the years.
Income per person is the amount of money people make on average per year.
In 1800, China slowly decreased from $979 per person until 1850, when it had a sudden drop to $512 per person. Each year, China eventually made its way back up when it started to even out around 1870 and stayed around 1800 until 1911. The next 26 years, China increased and made its way up to $1,037 per person. In the year 1936, they had another big drop in income. They dropped to $493 per person, but no sooner they went back up. Once they got up to $957 per person, they dropped down to $582.
In the 1800s, Canada had $1,160 per person. It increased by $1,299 in 1870. It started to increase and decrease a little from 1870 to 1913, then dropped to $4,872 in 1921, and it then increased again to $7,505 in 1928, then dropped to $4,891 within 5 years. It then increased rapidly to $10,540 in 1945. Canada then increased a little to $36,002 in 2012.
In the year 2012, China was getting $8,347 per person. I predict that throughout the years, China will continue to increase in income per person.
My prediction for Canada is that around the year 2020, Canada will start evening out in a straight line with income per person. This graph shows that Canada has always been ahead of China, but as the years have gone on, China has been increasing to close to what Canada's income per person is, and soon China could catch up to what Canada's income.
We are comparing life expectancy and income per person. Let us explain what both of those are. Life expectancy is how long someone lives on average in that country. For example, countries in Africa have a low life expectancy and countries in North America have a high life expectancy. Income per person is how much money the average person has in that country. For example, African countries have low income per person, countries in Europe have high income per person. Now take a look at our graph in 1800. Life expectancy is on the Y, income per person is on the X. As you can see, in 1800, all of the countries in the world have a low life expectancy and only earn a bit of money. Maximum life expectancy is about 40. The low is about 25.
In 1855, Sweden and Denmark and Norway have the highest expectancy. In 1888, you can see the greatest divide between Europe, Asian, and African countries.
In 1918, World War I began and around the world population dropped, especially in Europe. The same happens in 1944 during World War II. You can see the as you can see, European countries in North America are living longer and getting wealthier.
The end.
So you're all supposed to clap.
No, hold on. Okay, so what do you think is going to happen in the future?
That all the countries are gonna start to even out.
Meaning?
They're gonna be closer together.
In what ways?
Life expectancy and income per person.
Are going to be?
Close.
Low or high?
High.
What is that?
Oh, that's different. Obamacare is everywhere, so don't be scared you get hurt because Obamacare is always there.
Said by Obama.
Done.
Job good. Fun fact about Canada, we're awesome. We're done. Fun fact about Canada, we're awesome. Fun fact about Canada, we're awesome. Job good.
Hold on. And action.